How's that for? This meeting will come to order, please. Thank you very much for being here today. We're going to get right to work. We've got a lot of things to cover, so we're going to go right into our budget presentation. Mr. Whitten?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we've sort of broken this up into two presentations today. This really begins budget development, and I say that because Florida statute actually requires that you all, as the legislative body of the county, present to the county manager or to the budget officer your fiscal policies, so that that person can then take those, your fiscal policies and direction, and then take those and go away and build the budget. And so this begins that process. And so we'll have an overview by Jill Hayes, who is the budget director. And I think you all have seen that presentation before, and so it's really just educational. It's a broad overview of the county's budget. And then your budget obviously is about addressing critical needs as well as your routine needs. And so, you know, your most immediate critical need, one of your most immediate critical needs is roads. And so Mr. Denninghoff is going to have a somewhat of a drill down presentation on roads. And you'll see that when he gets to the meat of his presentation, that there's some good news and some bad news about the road program. You know, prior to 2016, we were only managing to maintain or provide recurring periodic maintenance to 8 miles of roads a year. That was increased this fiscal year to 20 miles per year. And I think you'll see in this presentation that actually it will go up to, pending the board's approval, up to 34 miles per year next year, with some dollars that can be allocated within the current fiscal year, some one-time dollars. And so in a short period of time, you've gone from 8 miles per year to 20 to 34. And the even better news is that in approximately 3 fiscal years, you would have paid off the constitutional gas tax bonds, and you can increase that, the revenues towards the annual maintenance or the periodic maintenance by about $3 million per year, and you'll go up to 61 miles per year. Remember, the goal or the requirement has been over the last couple of years 55 miles per year. And so you're getting there in terms of the periodic annual maintenance. You will still find that there's not enough money in the pot to address the backlog. And so that's going to be ultimately the long-term issue, but John will drill down on those. And so I would say to you that, again, I apologize for not giving you the information in advance. Obviously, we're transitioning. We have a new budget director. You'll have an interim county manager. And so as we put these presentations together, they all have to be involved because, again, it's a learning process for those who haven't done it before. You need more than just this one budget workshop. As you all are a new commission, I think that you need to see every department come before you so that you can drill down on their budget. And so I would ask that at the end of your discussions that you direct staff, the county manager, to look for more workshop dates. Because again, you need to provide that direction, and you need some details with regards to their budgets. And so I anticipate that this is the first of many workshops, and hopefully those are going to be scheduled in short order so that prior to the end of April, you'll have some direction, you'll give some direction to Mr. Abate as he begins to prepare the budget. We're not providing you any revenue estimates because it's still a little early in the game. And so as we start preparing those, the workshops will be very timely against those. And so I won't delay any further. We'll start with the overall budget presentation, and then Mr. Denninghoff will follow with a presentation on roads. And so I'll turn it over to Jill Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Whitten.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. So today's presentation is going to focus on the adopted budget for fiscal year 16-17. And what I'm going to do is walk you through the different revenue sources that are included in the adopted budget, and then we'll also talk about how those funds have been appropriated. And so the first information we wanted to give to you is just some facts about the adopted budget. The budget was adopted at just over $1,055 million, and that's actually a reduction of about 7.5% from the prior year final budget. Brevard County is the taxing authority for 20 operating tax districts. We wanted to focus on the general countywide tax rate, which is the millage that generates the property tax revenue for the general fund. And that tax rate is adopted at 4.3631 this fiscal year, which was a decrease from the prior year of 4.10%. And then it was also a decrease when compared to the statewide calculated rolled back rate, which was 4.3956. And as I mentioned, we have 20 operating tax districts, and we also have 5 voter-approved debt millages. What the aggregate operating tax rate represents is it's a state-required calculation, and what it does is it takes the total revenue generated by all of those operating millages and divides it by the total certified taxable property value to give you an aggregate rate. And so the tax rate that's paid by individual property owners is, of course, dependent on their geographical location, but the aggregate tax rate is important to understand because it is what the state uses to determine whether or not there was a tax increase. And so the aggregate operating tax rate for this year is 6.5919, which is a decrease when compared to the prior year rate, and it's actually a decrease from the rolled back rate. And so this is not considered for this year a tax rate increase per Florida statute or per the advertisement requirements in Brevard County's charter. So Florida statute chapter 129 establishes the guidelines for annual budgets for counties, and one of the most fundamental requirements is that the budget be balanced. And so we have to recognize not only operating revenue, but balances being brought forward and any other receipts so that they match the appropriations for expenditures and also reserves. So what this chart represents is the revenue side of that balanced budget at a macro level. The operating revenue represents 59% of the adopted budget at $624.6 million, and that's the revenue generated from your property taxes, charges for services, permits, fines, those special assessments, and other taxes. The balance forward represents funds that were unspent at the end of the prior fiscal year. And those can be unspent for a variety of purposes. A lot of times it's projects that are being carried forward that have not been completed yet. It also represents dollars in reserves. 4% of the budget is transfers, and what those are transfers between departments. For example, the general fund receives revenue from different operating sources and then transfers those to other departments. Well, those departments have to recognize those transfers as revenue. So those aren't new dollars, but they're transfers going into the department. So that's what that represents. And then the financing is 3%. That primarily represents a state revolving loan for utility services for the expansion of the South Central Wastewater Treatment Plant. And so as we move along through the next several slides, I'm going to spend some time discussing with you the differences between governmental accounting and private sector accounting. The Governmental Accounting Standards Board establishes reporting standards for local governments, and those are based on generally accepted accounting principles, which are the same for the private sector, but we also have additional requirements. We have state statutes for budgeting and determining millages. We also have local ordinances, and we are also responsible for following the Department of Financial Services Uniform Accounting System Chart of Accounts. So in order to ensure financial sustainability and adopt a structurally balanced budget, it's important to understand which of those revenues are reoccurring and what you can expect to continue from year to year. And so, again, we have the billion-dollar budget, and when you subtract from that the balance forward, which in the private sector, balance forward is not recognized as revenue as it is in governmental accounting. This would be a balance sheet account, so again, it's not revenue, so this is not new money. And then we subtract out the inter and intra-fund transfers. These are those dollars being transferred from one department to another. In the private sector, those would be eliminated with intercompany adjustments. And then the financing, again, these are loans, and in the private sector, these would not be recognized as revenues, but rather they'd be a balance sheet account and a long-term liability. So again, the total operating revenue, which are those reoccurring portion of revenues, is the $624.6 million. And so another important concept in governmental accounting is fund accounting. In government, the focus is on accountability, not profit, and we receive revenue sources that are restricted for specific purposes. And so GASB 54 sets the standard for fund accounting, and several years back, the county manager's office and the budget office developed a concept that we all fondly refer to as the color of money. And what that does is it helps break out and helps readers understand the different fund groups. And so this chart shows you the operating revenue and how it relates to the different fund groups. The green fund group are the general revenue funds, and these are not restricted. These are where you have the most discretion. And you'll notice there are two sections broken out here. I'm going to explain that in the next slide. The special revenue funds, those account for 36%, of the operating revenue, and those are used to account for specific revenue sources that are restricted legally. And again, I'll get into examples on the next slide of what all of these represent. The enterprise funds are those business-type activities that receive revenue for providing charges for services or goods. And then internal services, this is another proprietary fund that operates like a business. However, those charges for services are between departments. And so it's a cost reimbursement type situation, but it acts like a business. The debt service funds, these are the funds received from the 5 voter-approved debt service millage rates. And then we have a small slice there for the capital project funds, which we color orange. And I want to point out that capital project funds in this group here, these are funds that are received that are restricted for capital outlay. The majority of capital projects in the adopted budget are in the enterprise funds and in the special revenue funds. So utility services had $71 million in capital projects budgeted for this year, and that would be within those enterprise funds. The public works projects are budgeted in the special revenue funds. So I just wanted to point that out. And as we move into the next slide, we're going to focus on all of the sections of the pie except for that dark green general government section, because we're going to describe that a little bit later on in the presentation. But the other slices are restricted, so I want to go over those with you in a little bit more detail on the next slide. And so there's a portion of the general funds that are received for user or service fees. And these are dollars that are generated by performing a service, and they're not restrictive by nature. However, if you were to reallocate those funds somewhere else, then we would no longer have the resources to support the service, and then the service would go away and the revenues would be non-existent. So the biggest portion of that is the sheriff's office. The sheriff contracts with the school board, the Cape and Port Canaveral, and they provide services. So those are revenues being generated by the sheriff's office. The central services, that is primarily fuel that is purchased by fleet services and then resold to departments. Public Works, their general revenue that's identified here, they receive dollars from the FPL franchise fee and communication service tax for use of the public right-of-ways. And I won't go through every one of these, but I do want to highlight several of the larger ones in each group. So moving into the special revenue funds, the largest portion of your operating revenues here are in the Public Works Fund. And these represent several things. They're your road and bridge MSTUs, so those can only be spent for those projects in those areas. There are also revenues received from the local option gas tax and other fuel taxes, and then transportation reimbursement funds. Fire rescue is primarily, they also have an MSTU, the fire control MSTU, and their special assessment. Natural resources, these are primarily grants, and then the sheriff, their operating funds represent their law enforcement MSTU. So again, these are dollars that are restrictive, that can only be spent for a particular purpose. I'll also mention the Indian River Lagoon Trust Fund. While it's not included in the adopted budget, that we've been working closely with Natural Resources, County Finance, and the County Attorney's Office to make sure that the trust fund is set up for those particular funds so they can only be spent on that plan. And so that will be a special revenue fund once it's included in the budget, when the budget is amended. The enterprise funds, primarily these are utility services. These are those water charges, wastewater charges, and then solid waste. You have the disposal, collection, and recycling, and then transit services. These all operate based on charges for services. Your internal service funds are primarily employee benefits. These are the health insurance revenues that are paid into human resources by other departments and agencies for the health insurance plan. And then risk management, those are the property insurance revenues that are received from other departments to fund property insurance. And then IT is another example of the internal service funds. They receive their revenue from charges for services to other departments. The capital project funds, again, most of those are recognized in the special revenue. Most of the CIP projects are in the special revenue funds and the enterprise funds. However, there are some funds that are restricted to capital projects, and those are represented in the orange box. And then the debt service funds represent those 5 voted debt millages. And so that's the total non-general government operating revenue. So that represents $429.5 million of that $624 million in the prior pie chart. So again, how much of that is general operating revenue? When we take that $624.6 million, we subtract out the special revenue, enterprise revenue, internal service funds, user fees, and then the debt service revenue and capital project funds, that leaves just over $195 million in general government operating revenue. And so I want to spend a minute explaining to you what makes up that $195 million. The primary source of the general government operating revenue is the ad valorem taxes from the general countywide millage rate. So that is 68% of your general government operating revenue. There are 4 revenue sources that we refer to as major revenue sources, and those are the local half-cent sales tax, the state shared revenue, FPL franchise fee, and the communication service tax. So the other portion, the charges for services, these are dollars that are received in general government from the cost allocation plan. And the cost allocation plan, it represents charges for services received from other departments for countywide administrative services such as the Board of County Commissioners, the County Attorney's Office, County Finance, the County Manager's Office, and the Budget Office, to name a few. But again, so those are revenues coming from other departments in the charges for services. And then all other sources, these are a variety of things, including local business taxes, interest revenue, prior year ad valorem taxes. And so how much general revenue do we have? And so I've taken you from that billion-dollar budget, and we've broken down the portion of it that was operating revenue, and then we showed which portions of that $624 million were restricted, and then I walked you through the general government operating revenue. So now we need to add back in the balance forward that's associated with general government, and that is primarily due to general government reserves, and then also add back in the transfers in that are associated with general government, and that gives us total general revenue of $220.4 million. And so at the beginning of this presentation, I explained how Florida statute requires counties to adopt a balanced budget, and that is true for every individual fund within the county budget. And so what this chart represents is the balanced budget of the general government fund. And so on the left side, we have the general fund revenue sources, which I walked you through those, and the $220 million. And then on the right side, we show those appropriations for the general fund. So this is the balanced budget for the general fund. And I'm going to describe over the next several slides the details of what the appropriations are for the general fund. And so you'll see in this slide that the largest portion of the appropriations go to fund the 5 charter officers, the courts, and then mandates. So that's approximately 59% of the general government appropriations. We have other obligations that we are required to fund. There are some debt service payments associated with general government. We have the TIF payments that represents payments to the community redevelopment agencies and the North Brevard Economic Development Zone. We set aside dollars in reserves, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then 8% goes to fund public safety, infrastructure, and veteran services, which is what the board has identified as those core government services, and so we like to break those out separately. And so that leaves about 20% of the general government budget to be allocated to other county-wide departments. And again, we'll go through those as we move on through the presentation. Okay, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time describing to you the different mandates that we are required to pay. We are statutorily required to fund these mandates. And so the first one that we have listed here is Medicaid. And the county is required to contribute a portion of the state's required matching funds. And this amount is actually calculated during the Social Services Estimating Conference, and it is deducted directly from the local half-cent sales tax revenue that's received from the county. So we actually don't see these dollars. They're deducted directly from that revenue source. The next 2 items are the county's required commission payments to the property appraiser and the tax collector for the services they provide to the school board and the cities. And so this is a requirement of Florida Statute 192.091. So again, the county funds those services that are associated with the school board and the cities that the property appraiser provides, and the services that the tax collector provides to the school board. And we'll break out the portion that's applicable to the county in the next slide. Court operations, we're required to fund court operations per Article 5 of the state constitution, and there are 4 programs that are included in court operations. The largest portion is court facilities, which goes to fund all of the repair and maintenance, utilities, security services at the courthouses. And so this also funds the judicial branch, court IT, and a small portion to the state attorney's office and the law library. The Baker Act is another state mandate for mental health services for indigent Brevard County residents. And so this is something we're required to provide, and the Housing and Human Services Department manages this contract. And they also manage the medical examiner expenses, and this is the fees, salaries, and expenses associated with the medical examiner that we must fund per Florida Statute 406.08. We're also required to we share with the state the responsibility for juvenile detention, and the state determines the amount that the county is responsible for on this as well. And there are several other mandates that include the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council, Child Protection Team, Indigent Burials, Value Adjustment Board, and several others. Oops, went too far. Okay, moving along to the charter officers. The sheriff's office represents $92.7 million of the appropriations of the general government revenue. And there are 4 programs that are included in the sheriff's office. We have the law enforcement, that represents about $41.4 million. Jail operations are another $41.2 million. Judicial operations are $6.2 million, and animal services are $3.9 million. The supervisor of elections, we are required to fund. So, of course, this is the support of the elections. The next 2 items, again, we talked about the tax collector and the property appraiser in the previous slide, and which portion was associated with the cities and the school board. This portion represents the county's portion of services provided by the tax collector and the property appraiser. And then we have the clerk to the board, and they provide the county finance and accounting for the board, and also minutes and records. There are several other obligations that the general government is required to fund. Reserves, of course, provide government with options for responding to unforeseen conditions and risks, and it's also important to have some dollars in reserves as working capital. And our budget and financial policy, BCC 21, states that it's the goal of the board to keep those reserve levels at around 10% of the projected operating revenues for the current fiscal year. And right now, again, that operating revenue for general government was $195 million, so we are at approximately 8.5% is where our reserve account is at right now. The general government debt, as I mentioned, there are several debts that are paid through general government, primarily associated with the jail expansion and the courthouse expansion. And then we have the CRA payments to the cities and the North Brevard Economic Development Zone. And again, the next group of items, these are what the board has identified as the core government services, so we like to break these out. Fire rescue, this includes emergency medical services at $7.7 million, and then ocean rescue at $1.6 million. Public works, general government funds, road and bridge, that's the largest portion, and then traffic operations, survey and mapping, and some to engineering as well. And I'd like to point out again that Public Works also does receive some general government dollars directly from the FPL franchise fees and the communication service tax, and so that's not represented in this $7.1 million. And then emergency management operations and veteran services, those are additional items that we've identified, that have been identified by the board as core services. And so, again, when we take that $220.4 million and you subtract out the appropriations to the charter officers, the mandates, public safety and infrastructure, and veteran services, and then those other obligations, that leaves around $43.7 million in discretionary general funds that can be allocated to the other county departments. And so we'll walk you through how those are allocated. Parks and Recreation receives an appropriation of $12.2 million from the general fund, and that goes to support the operations and maintenance at the South, Central, and North area parks. Central Services, the largest portion of the general fund allocation, goes to support facilities management. So these are your electricity, water, contracted services, repair and maintenance, and capital projects at your countywide buildings and government centers. And then they also receive support for asset management and purchasing services. I wanted to spend some time breaking out general government and to show you what the $6.7 million allocation for general government, how that's broken out. You've got $1.4 million going to the Economic Development Commission. There were several economic incentives that have been previously approved that are included in the general government allocation, as well as the Brevard Cultural Alliance. And then the operating expenses that are included in general government, they include your indirect costs. There's also annual and sick leave payouts, your accounting, auditing, investment services. Those all fall under the general government allocation. We also wanted to break out the programs associated with housing and human services. And so you can see those here. Community Resources has 15.5 full-time equivalents, and Community Impact, these dollars support 25 full-time employees. Oops. And so then your other general government fund allocations, these show where the rest of those dollars are allocated throughout the county. And I won't read those off to you, but we just wanted you to have the list of all of those general fund allocations. And so the next slide, we think it's important to compare ourselves to other counties and see how we're doing. So this provides just kind of a look at what the other counties' millage rates are and the other taxes that are being levied in those counties. So as you can see, our general countywide millage rate at 4.3631 is lower than some of our neighbors, or all of our neighbors that we've listed here. And it's continued to go down. In 2012-2013, the countywide millage rate was 4.9063. So it has decreased over the past 5 years. The public service tax, this is municipalities and charter counties have the ability to levy by ordinance a public service tax on the purchase of electricity, gas, and water services. And so, again, this is not a tax that we have levied in Brevard County, although some of the municipalities within the county do levy this tax. And then the additional sales tax, up until January, we were at zero here. The 0.5%, that's that half-cent sales tax associated with the Indian River Lagoon. And then the local option fuel tax is represented in the right. Again, we're not levying any additional local option fuel taxes. And so that is my overview of the budget.
Mr. Chairman, we'll take questions. I think the point of that presentation is to always show you in the public that while we're talking about a $1 billion budget, only $624 million of that budget is from reoccurring sources, and then when you drill down to the amount that the board has the broadest discretion on, and we say broadest discretion, and that includes your mandates and your funding to charter officers, it's really, you go from a $1 billion budget to $624 million in revenues recurring, and then you go to the general revenue, general government resources are really $220 million with courts, the constitutionals and the mandates taking up 59% of the $220 million. And so when you look at your ability to squeeze out of the $220 million pot for roads, you can see that there's not a whole lot left in that pot after you dispense of your mandates, your charter officers, and the Article 5 funding, along with your core services there. And so, again, the pot begins to shrink significantly after you take all of those things out of the pot. So we stand ready for questions on that. John may need some time to transition, so and if you don't have questions on this, we'll go right into John's presentation on roads.
Comments, questions from the board?
I've got some. I don't need to go first, but you start.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to start with a couple historical things that happened prior to us coming on the commission, so we just have a little bit better of a understanding. On slide 3, you mentioned that it's an $86 million deduction from the previous year's budget. Can you explain a little bit more about the difference between the adopted budget and the final budget?
Sure. When the budget is adopted, well, throughout the year, we amend the budget, and primarily the budget is amended because we are receiving a grant that was not approved before the budget was adopted. So we don't want to budget for things like grants until they've been approved. So that's a portion of that. Also, there's balance forward. So again, during this time of the year, the departments are projecting what their balance forwards are going to be, and they are looking at what projects they have and what their expenses are going to be and making that projection. At the end of the fiscal year, after county finance reconciles the financial statements, those balance forwards can be adjusted, and so then we'll amend the budget as well. And so it's primarily those grants and balance forwards that
Thank you.
result in that.
And my question would be this, and thank you for that great explanation, and overall, a very great presentation. Would it be a better comparison to look at the adopted budget for 16-17 versus the adopted budget for 15-16? Because these are revenue sources that we can't predict, and I don't expect you to be able to predict what we get in, but would we see a decrease from 15-16 to 16-17 if we were comparing apples to apples instead of, as you have here, apples to oranges?
There are, I mean, you can do the comparison all sorts of ways, because each year they're amended. You can compare final to adopted, you can compare.
Well, I'm just asking, adopted budget, my question is simple. Adopted budget from 15-16 to adopted budget of 16-17. I'd just like to compare.
Yeah, that's a comparison. Yes,
Yeah.
sir, that is a comparison.
And my question, would we see an $86 million deduction?
I don't remember
No.
what that number is there. I don't know if you.
Would we see an increase? Would we see a decrease? I don't know. That's why I'm asking.
I'm looking to see if I have that number in front of me, but I'll get that number to you.
Okay. Following up on that, and this was before I entered, I understand that there was what's presented to us is decrease, 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 5 decreases here. Yet a vote had to be taken on the cap that is involved. Can you explain, not only to me, but the folks who are watching, how with being presented only with decreases, the board was required to make a vote for going through the voter mandated cap?
Okay, so my first day in the budget office, my predecessor, Tom Rosenberg, said to me, you need to memorize section 2.9.3.1 of the charter. And so I don't have it memorized, but I'll read it to you, because the Brevard County Charter ad valorem limitation is different than the state required rolled back rate. And so what the charter limitation says is that the Board of County Commissioners shall not impose an ad valorem tax for county purposes at a millage rate which causes the budgeted revenue to the county to increase over the budgeted ad valorem revenue from the previous fiscal year by the more than the lesser of 3% or the percentage change in the consumer price index from the preceding calendar year.
And so the first thing is that the cap is not related to the final adopted or the adopted budget. The cap talks about tax revenues from year to year. And when it talks about tax revenues, it talks about each of the 20 or 21 taxing districts associated with the aggregate operating millage. So it's a revenue from tax revenues each year and not a cap on the budget. So it really has, it's a component of the budget, but it's not capping the overall budget.
And I appreciate it. I'm sure that can you, for me, not the audience, because they're much smarter than me. Can you dumb it down again for me?
Yeah, like,
why I'm presented only with 5 decreases and no increases, and yet it was mandated in a sentence or two. Why that? And I'm not trying to be confrontational. I'm just trying to.
Because tax revenues, as she showed you on the pie chart, make up a portion of all the revenues. And so those tax revenues are capped with certain exceptions, but again, they're only a portion of the big piece of the pie, of the total piece of the pie for all revenues.
Okay, so we saw collections actually up. Is that?
Yes.
Is that? Okay,
Yes.
That's where I was going with that. Okay, thank you. Another one, as we're moving forward, and thank you so much again for drilling down how we get from $1 billion plus to barely anything. Can you explain how, as you begin crafting, I understand that this is for direction, as you begin crafting the 17-18 budget, will we be using the 16-17 numbers of the allocated funds and going off those, or will we start with 0 on the funds that are not mandatorily allocated? How as you start crafting the budget, will it be whatever, like 0 base, or will we be using on the funds that are not mandated? I want to be specific there.
Okay, so over the next several months, the Budget Office will be working closely with the departments to project what their needs are in terms of compensation and benefits, operating expenses, and then also what the projected revenues are. We'll be looking at state estimates for revenues and things like that. So that will happen over the next several months, and then we will sit down with the departments and the county manager's office and with guidance from you based on what happens in these budget workshops. We will develop a budget, a tentative budget, and present that to you in July.
Okay, thank you. Two more, and these are much more brief. On slide 16, you list the mandates, and I understand these are all mandated expenses. My question is each one of these numbers a formula? So not only is this a mandated expense, but the entire amount is mandated. Is the 1.7 million that we provide for Baker Act, that's a formula that we receive from the state? Or are we just mandated to spend some money on Baker Act? Any of these numbers?
Ian probably can handle the Baker Act.
And I didn't mean to specific that one out, I'm sorry.
Yeah, not all are formula-driven. There's a requirement to provide medical examiner services, and this is the cost of his office there. So that I know is not formula-driven.
Okay.
Ian can talk to you about Baker Act.
Yeah, the Baker Act itself, the mandate is from state statute.
Okay.
And I can't remember the exact statute. I sent that to you. But the statute says that of the community alcohol and mental health services that the state pays for, in total, 75% are paid by the state, 25% is paid by local.
Got it. Super. I appreciate it. As we move forward, I'd like to sit down and understand which one of these are formula, like Baker, it's just plug and chug, versus ones that, we're dealing with the medical examiner who is letting us know what his perceived budget is. I understand we have to fund. The question is what amount?
The Medicaid and then the property appraiser and tax collector, those are all formula-driven.
But the court operations is not?
Court operations, they do receive some revenue from other sources, fees on traffic tickets.
But
So
you
we spend
won't-
$188,000 on the law library.
Yeah.
Is that a mandate that we maintain that law library? And if so, do we have any discretion of whether to, increase or decrease that amount?
Well, we have that argument with them every year, and so you'll see that that's a special act, and so they are considered a special district, and off the top of my head, I don't remember how it's written in the special act or the ordinance, but I don't think that's formula-driven also.
Okay.
And then pretrial detention of juveniles is sort of formula bill that comes from the state, so that's just a bill that comes to us.
Cheap shot there. Thank you very much. And finally, and we went over this. I have my separate notes downstairs, so I should have brought them up. On the charter offices, again, the same question. We've got 5 down there. Some of these are formula-driven. Others are request-driven. Just for my edification and those that folks that are watching, can you tell us which ones are formula-driven and which ones are requests from the charter offices?
The property appraiser, tax collector are a fee for service, i.e. formula. And then the others are a submission to, so that was property appraiser, tax collector. The clerk of the court really is a budgetary request for county finance, and the clerk to the board functions. The sheriff's is a submission to the Board of County Commissioners, actually to meet his statutorily requirements. But again, that's a submission to the board, with the board having an ability to challenge to, I think, the governor if you disagree with his submission. And then the supervisor is a submission to the board with an ability to question, challenge, whatever the appropriate term is, to the, I think that's the Secretary of State.
And again, Jill, thank you so much for all this hard work. I'm sure you've raised more questions than, and I think that's a good thing we move forward. Thank you for those answers. I appreciate it.
I have a question on the on Medicaid. I know it's formula driven, but that formula can be changed through Washington.
Commissioner, actually, in the last several years, the Florida legislature changed the statute, and it's moved to a straight line computation that's actually in the statute itself as to what percentage that the county gets charged. If I recall correctly, it's based on the number of Medicaid clients within the county multiplied by what our percentage is statewide. So that number actually kind of fluctuates, or can fluctuate from year to year. We have seen it trending the last probably 8 years or so, trending up in the match that's required there.
So we really don't know until they tell us.
Well, I believe that one, they actually take those dollars directly out at the state level.
Right, now that. So
Yeah.
So you don't know until they remove.
wait till you see what you get.
Right.
Okay.
Any other board discussion?
I had a quick question, and it goes back to the exceeding the tax cap. What was the shortfall? Like, I understand, and maybe this is a board question more than a manager's question,
I
but
think
what
it
was the shortfall
I think it
based
was-
on the decision?
I think that was 2.4, if I remember correctly. 'cause-
That's the amount that was generated with the rate that exceeded the cap.
So it's 2.4, 1.2 to roads. Jimmy, I forget what you got there.
So it was 1.26 million to roads for an additional 15 miles of resurfacing, and then transit services was 154,000. In the resolution regarding the critical needs, we actually identified 4.3 million in critical needs, and those included the road maintenance, election cycle expenses, cost of living adjustments, and transit services and veteran services.
But the amount above the cap was how much?
The amount above the cap for the general fund was 2.4 million.
And so as you look at that, again, 20 millages, 20 taxing districts, but the cap issue was only associated with the general countywide tax rate, Road and Bridge District 1, and in Road and Bridge District 5. And the irony of all of that is that even that was still not per the charter, and there's a different section of the charter that requires an add for a tax increase when you go above rollback. Even with all of those, the aggregate millage was still obviously below the prior year and below rollback. So again, and Jill mentioned it earlier, that was the reason why there was no tax increase add requirement, because even exceeding the charter cap for those 3 districts, it was still, by the letter of the law, a tax decrease or not a tax increase.
Good. Do we have any public comments? Seeing none, let's move into other business, which would be Mr. Benninghoff.
Give us a moment. I think we got some handouts we need to give to each of the commissioners. Sandy's going to be doing that. I'll make sure my clicker here is working right. Yep. So, commissioners, you should have at your desk 3 handouts. One is going to be the PowerPoint presentation. Second one is going to be this sheet here. It's a 2-page, 8.5 by 14 sheet and spreadsheet, and then you got the big, large format folder. I'll be referring to those 2 during my presentation. I'm going to let Sandy finish before I get started. Okay, Commissioners, good afternoon. I'm going to be making a presentation here today that's really about the Public Works Department. It's not the budget for the Public Works Department, but what it's really intended to do is to show you what is happening and occurring with some of our most high-profile issues that we've got associated with what we do for the public. And along those lines, therefore, we're going to be talking about our infrastructure or inventory. We'll be talking about some of our funding sources and how those things are shaping up and have been trending for years. And we'll talk a bit about identifying maintenance needs, specifically about roads, almost exclusively really here. But and then we'll be talking about some projections on how those things are going to be lining up. So first we'll go to the infrastructure. This is, by the way, all these slides and information have been updated from the items that you may have seen previously, and they're updated to give and provide the best available information that we have currently. So our inventory of paved miles of roads, this is centerline miles, is 1,113. That is an updated number as new subdivisions are constructed by developers or we build new roads. That inventory goes upwards. Occasionally they'll go downwards when we transfer a road to a city, which doesn't happen very often, or if a city annexes a neighborhood, then some of those roads will drop off of our inventory and move over to city inventory. We have 80 miles of unpaved roads, and then probably the next most important one as far as maintenance issues are concerned is the sidewalks. So we're approaching 600 miles of sidewalks now. This is a different way of looking at those paved and unpaved miles of roadways for the whole county. Again, the paved is on the left side is 1113, and it's divided by each individual district. And on this pie chart, on the right-hand side of this slide is the unpaved roads for the entire county, also divided by district. That one probably has the most pronounced, obvious thing that sort of stands out, and that is that District 1 has 68 out of the 80 miles for the entire county, and so it's the overwhelming majority of it. If you add them all together, dirt and paved roads, it's 1,193 miles. I've shown this slide previously, but it used to be that if you drove our inventory, you wound up in New Haven, Connecticut, but now you get through New Haven, Connecticut, and you get to Middlefield, Connecticut. So you have to use somebody else's miles to come back. What we have here is just a tabulation of neighboring counties and what their paved, unpaved miles inventory is. And again, we've tried to update those based on information that's available from those sources. We're kind of in the middle of the pack, so to speak, in terms of the total. That's just as a frame of reference. There's no other particular interest on this particular slide. So that's kind of our inventory. I focused on the paved miles because that's probably where our biggest, I'll call it, liability is associated with the level of service that we've been performing. So now I wanted to go ahead and shift towards a discussion of some of the funding sources. This is a slide, I've shown it before. These are now updated, and it illustrates Brevard County is on the far left, and then each of those same counties that were on the earlier slide, we've illustrated what they have. We put their miles down, their total miles down at the bottom, and then this bar chart illustrates the magnitude of the revenue streams that are illustrated here. As Jill had referenced, most of these counties, well, all of these counties except Brevard have at least one other revenue stream that Brevard does not have, and several of them have 2, 3, or even 4 that are not, that Brevard does not have. To just very quickly go over it, Brevard County does have the LOGT 1 through 6 cents and gas tax. We also have the statutorily implemented constitutional gas tax, so that's shown in the blue. We have the 9th cent, that's the yellow diesel fuel tax, and that is also statutorily implemented. We have some in the green. We've got the communication services tax revenue there that is shown on this one, and then that is what we have as far as these revenue streams are concerned. The LOGT 1 through 5, Jill did go over that accurately. The very I think all but one of the other counties up there has that, well, as compared to us. And then the remainder of those up there that are listed, the infrastructure surtax, the 9-cent motor fuel tax, and the public services tax, we do not have. Those, the surtax and the services tax are the kind of burnt rust-colored and the purple color up there. The 9-cent motor fuel tax is one that could be implemented by local authority, and would all come to the county were it to be implemented, and would not be divided with the cities the way the 1 through 6 pennies on the gas LOGT is. Again, this is just by comparison from one community to the next. Wanted to go ahead and go over the local option gas tax revenues. I get a lot of questions about this, and it was implemented originally in 1986, and I believe we just had a partial year revenue stream that year, and then from that point on we got a full year revenue. And so what I'm going to show you is initially is this blue. This shows you the revenue stream as it existed from the beginning all the way up to this 2016. And what you can see, or one of the things that you can recognize, I'm going to try to point it out if I can, if my hand's steady enough. We started pretty low, we came up to close to $6 million, and we climbed up to about $7 million through a number of years here. Through the boom years before the Great Recession, we had an increase, but there was some faltering that took place. It dropped back down to about 7, which was pretty close to what it was for many years back previously. And it stayed there until we had a big jump. Now I'm going to talk about that big jump. That wasn't because we implemented new gas taxes or anything else that we did, that we were just lucky. I'll explain why we were lucky there. Since then, we've seen some more increases, but I want to point out that first one happened in 2012. 2013 and 2014 actually came down, and that's going to be an important point that I want to make. And then in the last 2 years, we're starting to see an increase. Now, our projection is it's not going to keep doing that. If it did, we'd probably solve all our problems, but that's not what we project is going to happen. Now, that's the actual raw revenue. That's the actual dollars collected. And so what we did was we wanted to see what that revenue is in today's dollars, so we sort of back calculated the inflation rate going all the way back to 1986. And that's what this slide does. And a couple of things that I want to point out. 1987-88 both collected more money in purchasing power than we're collecting today after all this nice stuff that happened to us that I haven't told you all about yet. And the rest of the time when you adjust for the inflation rate, you can see that there's actually a downward trend. And I want to tell you that that's not just Brevard County, that's not just Florida, that's the entire country. There's a lot of concern in the public works arena, transportation arena, about what is happening to the revenue streams which are dependent on gas taxes. The fuel efficiency in cars and the travel distances that people are driving are, well, the efficiency is going up and the distances they travel are going down. And in fact, one of the things that's happening with the millennials, if I said that right, is that many of them don't even drive cars. I can tell you my youngest son wasn't even real interested in getting a driver's license until he found a girlfriend, but and he wasn't in a big hurry about that either. So anyway, well, he's been very patient about girls. I'll tell you, this is a big issue that we are losing revenue in comparison and true purchasing power, and in some cases the actual dollars collected are lower. So we wanted to look to see what this was on a population basis. And so this red line is the population in the state, starting all the way back at 86, coming up to current day. And so what we did was we took that population and divided it into the LOGT revenue as adjusted for inflation. So I'll go back. Yep, there we go. That red line there is what we divided by the population to see what the purchasing power per person per capita was going to do. So there's the population, and here's what the revenue, the true purchasing power revenue associated with the local option gas tax is. And so point out a couple items. Even the partial year in 1986 is more than what we have today after we have these wonderful things that we saw in terms of recent revenue. So that shows you what's really happening with that revenue stream, and we do rely on that revenue stream tremendously for transportation, both maintenance and capacity. A couple of things that I wanted to sort of point out and kind of go into where that nice revenue, new revenue, has been coming from, and a couple of nuances about it. First of all, the principal source of this revenue is a result of a fuel tank farm that has been constructed by Port Canaveral on the north side of the port. If you ever look at an aerial photograph of that, you can't miss it. There's a bunch of round white dots all over the place, and those are all fuel tanks. They hold a lot of fuel, and because of that, the way the state calculates the share, certain portions of the share of local option gas taxes, we were the beneficiaries of getting that because the port built that tank farm. There wasn't a change in the amount of revenue in the entire state. What it was the distribution of that revenue got changed by calculation, and so we got a bigger share because those tanks are located within Brevard County. The principal losers of revenue, remember I said the revenue didn't really go up. The principal, we were a winner on that one. The principal losers were Miami-Dade, Brevard, and Palm Beach counties. I saw how much they lost, and they probably didn't notice it very much. We certainly did notice it. What I did want to say about it is that it is local option gas tax. The cities get about half of that revenue. We get the other half of it, approximately, and so the cities benefited as well. When this first happened, we didn't get told by anybody that was happening. All of a sudden, we were getting more revenue, and everybody's trying to figure out why. So we were in contact with the Department of Revenue in Tallahassee. To be simple about it, they were pretty tight-lipped about what was going on, and eventually we sort of pried out of them exactly what was happening, or pretty close to exactly what was happening. And so they informed us, and so we were excited about that, but we were wondering, is this going to be a long-term revenue stream that's going to be maintained, or is it going to be recurring? Should we treat it as one-time revenue? How should we deal with it? Cities were asking the same thing. And their answer was, we distribute it by formula, and that's about all they would tell us. And so we were kind of like, well, all right, what are we going to do? Well, the next year, it dropped down. And so that made us pretty nervous. And so at the direction of the board, we treated the additional revenue as though it was one-time money. Again, not being sure that it was going to be a recurring source of revenue. In 2015 and then 2016, we see a further ramp up of the revenue, and that is apparently a result primarily of increased economic activity more than the tank farm, but our share, remember, goes up because we have the tank farm. So as a result of that, our increase does pretty well. With that, we've begun to recognize that it's a more stable revenue stream than we had anticipated. The revenue that was collected was distributed by a mid-year allocation process that we had been using when we put it together, lumped with other revenue streams or reallocation opportunities that we had. And so we did put it to use, and I'll show you more about that in a moment. But at this point, we think that there's a couple of things. We feel that we should treat $1.5 million a year of that as a recurring revenue rather than doing it in a mid-year budget change. And so for fiscal year 17-18, unless the board tells us to do it otherwise, we're planning on going with that as a recurring revenue. So it'll be budgeted rather than allocated by in some sort of a separate process. But I do want to emphasize that out of that revenue stream, we did give $1.3 million to Road and Bridge, and we've been continuing that to help fund their operations. In addition, as I had mentioned, that revenue has been used exclusively on transportation. It is, back to the color of money, it's pink, is what I call it. So it is dedicated revenue for transportation, can't be spent on just general fund services or non-transportation purposes. I wanted to talk about a little bit more about those mid-year allocations that we used that million or that increased revenue for. We started that actually before we ever got the revenue from that resulted from the tank farm being constructed. It actually started in the latter part of calendar year 2010, and it started being spent in 2011, calendar 2011, so 10-11 fiscal year. The board reallocated quite a bit of money, almost $30 million, for the purposes of taking care of transportation needs. The vast majority of the money was going towards resurfacing and reconstruction of roads, and you'll see more evidence of that here in a few minutes. Where does the money come from? The biggest portions of it was that we were getting low bids at that time that were significantly lower than what our bid estimates were. The state was getting that in their road projects. They were getting some projects in that were 40% below what their projected costs were. The Pineda Causeway was one that we benefited from. That had been estimated at about a $22 million construction project, and we got it for 12. And so much lower that we actually we had to turn back some grant money to the state, which didn't quite kill me, but it threatened to. We also had some projects that originally were projected to cost more money. When these bids were starting to come in low, then we were seeing lower costs there as well. And then we got grants. We flat out got grants that we couldn't count on, and so that relieved us of the responsibility to provide local funds to fund the entire project. So we had funds that could be reallocated for that. And then another substantial amount of money came from, frankly, the Vieira Company with their Development of Regional Impact that it was a mandated contribution to our transportation construction for improvements, and specifically Barnes Boulevard. So that was over $12 million. And so here is a representation of this. Now, again, these are all treated as non-recurring, but wherever it says reimbursement, interest, or bond, or reallocation, that is true 100% non-recurring money. And where it says LOGT or CGT, those could be recurring or could not be recurring depending on a couple of details associated with it, but the vast majority of that, almost $64 million, it was one-time money. So it's not new money, most of it, and indeed, most of it did go to maintenance, as I said. I like to show this slide. I do get asked about it pretty often. Since 2000, when we started bonding a lot of gas tax revenue streams, we have generated a lot of construction projects, some of them maintenance, some of them capacity. We leveraged a lot of grant money. We utilized lots of impact fee funds, and the source of the local funds for it was impact fees and the constitutional gas tax and the local option gas tax. With that, we were able to do over $200 million in capacity improvements and over $73 million in maintenance improvements. I get asked a lot of times, well, isn't the maintenance more important than the capacity? And I'm going to talk about that a little bit through my presentation, but I'm going to tell you that if you don't do the capacity, you're going to suffer. And if you don't do the maintenance, you're going to suffer. And so I can't tell you which is more important and which is less important, but I will tell you that it's really important to take care of both of them, and your future will be less bright if you don't take care of your transportation system in both as to capacity and maintenance. I did list some of the capacity projects just as an example there. The Piney to Causeway extension was one of those. Barnes Boulevard widening, currently under construction, is one of those, and both of those were substantially funded with grant funds as well as local funds. Heritage Parkway is another one. We've done a great many intersection improvements. I didn't look them all up just to refresh my memory, but there's been quite a few of them. And I can tell you, without the Piney extension, Wickham Road would be virtually impassable right now. And I just got to tell you, you got to take care of both maintenance and capacity. Looking at more of these revenue streams, the Municipal Services Taxing Unit, MSTU, this is the revenue that we received over that period of time, 2009 to 2016. I'm not going to say it's flat. It spent most of its time down over that period of time. It is starting to rebound, but if you accounted for the effects of inflation, I'm going to tell you that the purchasing power is less today than it was in 2009. One other thing about it, it's pink. That means that it's got to go to transportation, drainage systems, and maintenance is what it's used, and can't go to general government purposes. Jill had mentioned the franchise fee. This is a trend that it has had over the last almost 8 years, I think it is. And it's trending down, 9.5% decrease. Again, that's real dollars. Adjusted for inflation, it'd be significantly worse. Communication services tax, it's a less substantial amount of money, but it also is trending down. And once again, if you adjusted for inflation, it would be substantially worse. This is the Public Works Department, the entire department's general fund transfer history. And you can see a substantial drop, and then it started to rebound. I'm going to point out up there in the right, Jill had already mentioned it, $1.26 million in general fund that has come to for this year. It doesn't show up on this screen, but it's a real important thing that's happening, and you'll see why here in just a moment. But I want to point out that huge decrease was principally done by eliminating through attrition vacant positions, and we cut back on services. And just as an example, we do less resurfacing than we used to do. We still have a priority on drainage, because if you flood people's houses, and if you can drive on a bad road, but it's pretty hard to sleep in a bathtub. I like to say the water comes in and visits you at night if it floods. Your bad road, at least when you watch TV, it doesn't bother you. But what I will say is that mowing, for example, we were mowing over 6 times, a cycle of 6 mows per year. We've cut that down to between 2 and 3. And we've got less manpower. We're spending less on fuel and less on maintenance and repairs than we used to in order to accommodate the lower budget. So again, there's that $1.26 million. It'll come back up, but again, there's no adjustment to any of that with respect to inflation or effects of inflation. So that's kind of what's happened with the revenue trends or the funding sources that we have. I'm going to move on into identifying maintenance needs and kind of how we have gone about making the projections that we have and making the calculations that we have with respect to expenses and anticipated expenses going forward. To do that, I wanted to bring up this slide. There's several things about it. The green line there is not a happy line. That's an unhappy line, and that represents the condition of a roadway over time. And what the dollar amounts there are doing is representing what the maintenance of that road has or needs in order to bring it back up to an excellent condition that you'd see up here on the far left near the vertical axis here. And this would be a representation of the condition. So a new road would be an excellent, one that is mostly potholes would be down here somewhere in very poor to failed area. If you spend money up in this region, you're going to spend less money to get it back up to this kind of condition than if you wait till it gets down in here, and that's what this red box is about. And this is just a rule of thumb, but if you spend $1 at the right time, you're going to save 4 to 7 times that in order to get the same effect. And so it's a huge expense that you sort of avoid if you do it in a timely manner. I'm going to point out that it's not really a return on investment exactly, but there's 2 things that are really good about doing this up in this area right here. First, you avoid having to spend a whole lot of money. And all the time and effort that it takes to rebuild a road is very annoying to the public, to say the least. I can assure you I get plenty of calls about that. But the other thing that really happens that's of benefit to the public is that they spend a lot more time driving on roads that are up here than they are driving on roads that are down here. And that makes a big difference to them. At least that's what they tell me. Wanted to go over that condition assessment. So that was just sort of setting the stage for why this is really important. In 2011, for the first time, we performed a comprehensive inventory of our paved roads, well, also our dirt roads, but the main effort was associated with the pavement. And as a part of that, to get it done, we selected a professional firm that has highly qualified for this. They did a really good job for us. And they prepared a report. And what they did was they basically classified every road as to its the pavement condition. And they call that a pavement condition index. That's a PCI. So you're going to hear those initials a couple more times. The PCI is really, what it boils down to is it expresses the condition of the asphalt, and it's really a function of how many cracks, what kind of cracks there are, how deep those cracks are. So not all cracks are created equal. Some of them are more substantial than others, and the road can take some cracking that's of a minor nature and can take less of a major nature. The idea is the pavement condition gets bad enough, then the road base that's under the asphalt becomes exposed to rain, and the effects of that water rapidly deteriorate the road base, which is the foundation that holds the pavement in place. And so the pavement collapses, you get more potholes, you get complete failures of the roadway, and eventually that's the future of every road. It's an inevitability. The roads are going to go through this process, but timely maintenance is less expensive, is what it boils down to. In order to do that pavement condition index, PCI, the consultant divided the entire county road network, all 1,100 plus miles, into over 9,000 segments. And we identified those and had a PCI for each one of those segments so that they were in manageable sizes, and we could identify them in an individual basis. He also provided us with an estimate of what we should expect to see in the rate of decline of the condition of the pavement for each year going forward until we get a new assessment done. We should really get assessments done on a 3 to 5 year cycle, and we don't have a new one yet. We're working on that now, but that's how we aged the roads, if you will. And so since 2011, we had resurfaced 229 miles of roads. And every time we resurface a road or a road segment in that pavement condition, we reset it to 100, and then we start aging it from that point forward, whenever that resurfacing took place. And so call your attention now to the large format folder that you've got on your desk or in front of you. That is a countywide ledger, if you will, of all 9,000 plus segments of roadways. It has the name, they're sorted by district, so you got District 1 through 5, and the roadway segments are sorted into 4 categories. Reconstruction is with the red heading. The at risk is the roads which might be able to only require resurfacing but are clearly getting close to having to slip into the reconstruction arena. Then the yellow headings is the ones that we feel, hey, they're probably still in the resurfacing and not threatening to get into the reconstruction arena yet. And then there's the blue, which is kind of the happy area. There is at the back of each district also a purple, which represents where the dirt roads are, but that's not really the subject of our discussion right now, but it is there. And but what I do want to point out to you is that we've got at the beginning of each segment or each district, we've got a summary that shows that district's totals for each of those categories, a dollar figure based on a planning level estimate of what it costs to take care of those roads at this point, or at the end of this year, really. And but at the very first page is the county-wide. That's the entire county that shows that we show there. Each segment's identified by name of the road, then where it starts, where it stops, and what the condition was in 2011, and then what we estimate its condition is today. And recognize that it may have been resurfaced since 2011, and so if it went up because it got resurfaced, but not because somebody decided to just change it. So that's how we've done that. We've aged the roads, and then we're projecting or extrapolating what we believe is going to happen to them. So this slide is a slide that sort of... Yeah, that's probably a good point, commissioners. If I draw your attention back to the slide, that book is free to keep, and we gave each commission district a copy of the report that we got in 2011, so this would be a replacement for that. And as far as the road segments themselves, it's not a new study or a new report in that sense, but it is an update as to where we believe we are. Okay, that first page in the book is now really reflected up here in this slide, and the pavement condition, PCI, is running up on the left side, the vertical axis. Age is running out here. It's just generalized. And for each one of these areas, we've got the blue, the yellow, orange, and the red. And what we've told you is how many miles there are, so you don't have to figure it all out. It's 379 that are in the green, or blue, rather, and so we don't have a dollar figure associated with that one. However, there are things that we can do with roads in this area that would flatten out this part of the curve, and then they would drop down, and that's money well spent, but we've got such a big backlog down here that we don't do much of that. So down here in the yellow, the orange, and the red, you add that together, that gives you 734 miles of backlog. We put the dollar figure for each one of these next to it. Again, it's a planning level sort of estimate. It's not for each individual road. And I'll point out that if you add the orange and the yellow together, that's 589 miles. Let's just round it off as 600. And if you add the dollar figures there, that's the 69 miles, or $69 million in round numbers. Come down here to the reconstruction. We've got 145 compared to almost 600. And we've got 86 million, almost 87 million, which is more than that 600 needs. And so that illustrates this, I call it the return on investment. It's not really quite correct return terminology, but if you can keep your roads out of that, you get a big savings for the taxpayers, plus you avoid a lot of bad condition roadway. So I get asked, so where should we be spending our money? And the answer is, we should spend most of our money in this area. The other area that would be best to spend money is actually up here, because it's so much cheaper to do it up here. But it's such a devastating cost if you let it drop down into reconstruction that you've got to just about do whatever you can to keep it from happening. 400 miles, and we're not doing the 55 today that we need to be doing. I'm going to show you that here in a moment. So we have roads every year that are dropping out of the orange into the red, as well as dropping out of the yellow going into the orange and dropping out of the blue going into the yellow. It's absolutely unavoidable. You can't stop it. All you can do is treat it in a timely manner and then get a savings by doing that. I mentioned the 55 miles. This represents that 229 miles of roads that we resurfaced. This 55 is just for that. That number comes from our total inventory divided by 20 years. So how much would you do per year? 55 miles. So that kind of tells you, gives you a measuring stick as to where you should be. In 2011 and 2012, we were actually slightly above, well, slightly in 2012, and we were well above it in 2011. That was done with green money, which was these mid-year allocations that we were talking about earlier. Vast majority of that money went to road maintenance, and you see what it did. Very good, except that then it was gone because it was basically one-time money, and then suddenly we dropped back down. And so if you average it out over that 6-year period of time, it's about 38 miles resurfaced each year. So and you can see the general fund money there, that $1.26 million reappears, and it shows up right there. We aren't done with that yet, and so we'll see if we get it all finished and according to our plan for this year. But so that's projected, and it is projected in the report that you have there as well. If we don't get it done this year, we'll get it done early next year. We think we'll get it done, though. I want to now direct your attention to the handout that you have that looks like this one. It's got the yellow header on it. It's the unfunded transportation projects. In there, the top is the capacity projects, and then the maintenance is in there. The maintenance that is shown on that slide is included in this list. Okay, the lengths and for each district is included in this list, and the dollar figure is there. Okay, but it doesn't show that way on here, but that's what's in there. If you look at your by district booklet there that you have, you'll see the same numbers that come up. What this is a representation of what we have identified as to maintenance and capacity needs that do not currently have funding that is up to taking care of them. Again, I'm going to talk about capacity and maintenance and this balance that you've got to have. It's almost impossible to get a grant for maintenance. Almost impossible. So when you're taking care of maintenance, you're spending your own money. When you're doing capacity, you can frequently get grants, and you can get a substantial amount of them. And in fact, we've benefited tremendously for that because we were prepared with a set of plans, or we had done the right-of-way acquisition, and we were able to take advantage of an opportunity to get construction dollars for those projects. So it's important to pay attention to that situation. But it's equally important to pay attention to what's going on with the maintenance, and we just saw how devastating it is to let it go. So these are not. Somebody asked me not too long ago if the list on this if this particular list was sort of a grab bag and just an opportunity to throw just anything against the wall and hope that we might get it. I can assure you that if that was the case, it'd be quite a bit larger. And there's a few projects in here that wouldn't hurt my feelings if we eliminated them, but I'll tell you right now that the biggest ones are badly needed projects, both on the maintenance and the capacity side. But it does total up nearly $600 million, again, updated principally on the cost of maintenance that we just went over. Okay, so I'm going to switch now to projections as to where we sort of feel like we're going. To do that, I want to give you a little bit of information and a little bit of good news, a little bit more good news instead of all bad news. Right now, we have historically been spending about $635,000 a year in MSTU on resurfacing and reconstruction activities. General fund, we talked about the $1.26 million, and we also talked about this $1.5 million in local option gas tax transfer that we think is available. Obviously, that's subject to the board, but that totals up just under $3.4 million. And so that's a big improvement from the $365,000. I'm going to show you that on the next slide. But first, I want to bring in another thing to remind the board about. And I've brought this up in the past, but it's getting closer. The constitutional gas tax bonds are due to be retired in August of 2020. So starting after that, we will have a revenue stream that is now no longer dedicated to debt service and is now available to be spent for current needs. If that's the way the board wants to do it, we could spend it on road maintenance. And it comes to about $3 million. It varies from one year to the next, but in round numbers, it's about $3 million each year. So that's a substantial, I think, good news, and I'll show you why that is good news. This chart, I'm going to take just a couple of minutes to go through it. 2017 is right here, and that's at the end of this year. This is what we project at 734 miles of backlog. But for a moment, let's look back at 2016. We have the MSTU at $635,000. We didn't have the 1.26 general fund. We didn't have $1.5 million in gas tax coming in, and we don't have the $3 million from the constitutional gas tax debt service, which because it's dedicated and it's being used to pay off those bonds. So there's what we had. We were getting about 8 miles a year on that out of the 55 that we need to be doing. So by back calculating that, using the 55 less the 8 that we did, this is what we would have had last year. This is what we project would be this year when we add, my battery may be going dead here, the 1.26 million up there, we get about 20 miles of roads resurfacing. Is there one on this? I'll give it a try. Hopefully I don't zoom through the presentation. So the 1.26 added to that gives us about 20 miles that we're able to do. And so that's a significant improvement. But then when you add in the 1.5, we jump it up to that nearly 3.4 almost million. So that gets us up to about 34 miles of roads. So you do the math, these two numbers and the 55 miles per year, that puts you at a still greater than it is for the current year. At the end of next year, we're at 755. So you continue doing that with the 34 and the 34 for the next couple of years, and when the constitutional gas taxes were just under 800 miles. Again, that's an estimate. I hope to have a new assessment done, and we'll be updating a lot of information, but that's the best information we have right now. You add in the 3 million, and you add in that 3 million, then it jumps up to 61, and for the first time we see it using recurring funds at something north of 55 miles.
John, let me just point out here that just so everybody keeps everything in perspective, your estimated backlog would still be 791 miles
Yes, sir.
out of roughly 1,100. So
Yes.
we're really getting to the point where
It's only the roads that we've resurfaced in the very recent past that are not in a condition where they should be being considered for resurfacing.
so we're really getting behind her and behind her.
Oh, yes, we are. There's no doubt about it. So the good news is we're getting behind her to a lesser amount. But, so I like that, being an optimist, but being also looking at the half-empty side of the glass, we're not going the right direction, and even when we get to this one, we're not going the right direction fast enough. And I'm going to tell you, there's a couple of things about this that are really important to recognize. First of all, no inflation effects are accounted for in here. So in reality, what's going to happen is this money is going to go less and less far, so these numbers are going to go down, which means these ones are going to go up. And so we're really going to be worse off over there if we don't come up with something else. And that's just on the effects of inflation. In addition to that, if we spend money on reconstruction, then that means we're going to spend less on resurfacing, which means, yeah, we'll get a resurfaced road, a reconstruction road up into the good range, but we let another one fall down into reconstruction, and so that number will go up because of that.
Yeah, because really what you're going to be doing is if you reconstruct 2 miles, you're letting 7 miles deteriorate.
That's correct. That's correct. And but it's very tempting and hard to tell a person who lives on one of these roads that, no, we're not going to fix your road. That's a pretty hard thing. And it's not, some people say I enjoy saying no. It's really not true. My kids were convinced I love to say no, but there is another piece of good news. So the $1.5 million is a piece of good news. The $3 million is a piece of good news. We also have a mid-year allocation or reallocation opportunity that's available in the amount of about $6 million. However, there's some details associated with that I want to kind of go over, but that's another opportunity that we have. So this is some of the stuff that I've already gone over, but we need to update all of this. The planning level cost estimates are just that, planning level. So this is the best we have and can plan for right now. But so there's assumptions that are associated with that, or the previous slide. This is that $6 million. As you can see, right there's the $6 million. But there's a couple things I do want to point out. And this is pretty typical for these allocation opportunities that we've had in the mid-year. Here's bond proceeds. Bond proceeds. This is a development contribution right here. All one-time money, so it's not recurring. This right here is the $1.5 million, so it's going to become a recurring revenue stream, but for the purpose of this $6 million, it's not going to contribute to future allocation opportunities because we're going to budget it on a recurring basis. So that one's going to go away in the future. These ones will all go away before too long, and so we'll be left with residual money that was just from low bid projects or projects that cost less than we projected. One last thing I wanted to point out about this slide: Friday road improvements, $765,000. Call to your recollection Cocoa Expo. That's where that is. If we allocate it to something else now, it won't be available for that purpose. So if you're going to want to keep it for Cocoa Expos, or not Cocoa Expo, because they aren't ever going to get that money, but if we're going to put it on Friday Road, then it's in a sense already allocated. If, on the other hand, you want to move it from that project, it's available for allocation. So depending on how you want to deal with that, then we'll do as directed, of course. I want to go back to this discussion about the maintenance versus the capacity. This is just a reference to an article that I'll read. It said, voters in at least 6 Florida counties to vote on transportation aid. I didn't like the word aid in that thing, but I think it fit the headline for the newspaper. But what it was is really tax. they were voting on a tax, additional new revenue, and it was either the form of gas taxes or it was a form of some sort of infrastructure or services tax that was coming in to pay for principally roads. It wasn't 100% roads, but mostly either new capacity or maintenance of existing roads. And that was just for 2016. That was just that one article. If we'd gone back 5, 6, 7 years, what you would see is that it's commonplace for this situation to come into existence. It's very difficult to manage to hold ground on both capacity and maintenance, and it's pretty normal for communities to find themselves in this predicament that we've got. We ourselves, in 2000, were spending no money from local option gas tax on maintenance at all, none. And then we paid off some bonds at that time, and we took the local option gas tax, put it to Road and Bridge to do maintenance, and it ramped up to a lot of expense or revenue going that direction to pay for those expenses. And then we bonded that and put it towards the bond proceeds towards capacity, and the revenue went to pay the debt service, and all of a sudden the maintenance funds were gone. So we go from maintenance to capacity, to maintenance to capacity, and it just goes back and forth like this, and it's very, very normal. How to exactly avoid it, I know how to do it in my house, but I'm not sure how to do it in a political environment, to be honest. In any event, it's just not a horribly unusual circumstance, I guess, is the main point. I'm kind of to my last slide here. I want to take just a minute to put this in perspective. This is very similar to a slide that the Blue Ribbon Advisory Committee prepared for their final report. I've sort of intentionally done it. If you want to go back and look at that report and compare numbers, you can. But I've updated everything on that to try to illustrate where we really are. So I'm going to bring in parts of this slide at a time. First, on the left-hand side is ongoing recurringly funded items for maintenance. We'll point out one thing real quickly. Right there is the $1.26 million in general fund, and I'm going to say I presumptively added in the $1.5 million from the gas tax right here. And so all of these roll up to the $31 million that you see up here. So I'm assuming, for the purposes of this slide, that these revenues are going to go here and will continue to go there going forward. This central part of the slide is, if you see it's in red, that means it's unfunded. So it's not very subtle, I suppose. But what we have is, oops, let me take that away for a second. What we have here is a resurfacing shortfall that we would have absent either the constitutional gas tax or any other revenue stream that would come in. So we're still, remember the 34 miles that we had? Subtract that from 55, that gives you that 21. So that's 21 miles per year that we're short. That comes up to about $2.3 million per year that we need to do just for the resurfacing. There's some other, we haven't spent much time talking about it, but there's some other funding shortfalls there that we estimate are $2 million per year. So that rolls up to $4.3 million. No capacity here, none. And so I'm going to bring in the right-hand side of the slide, and I'm going to first go to the capacity. I'm going to show that is over here, and it does roll up into this $613 million up here, and that's the same dollar figure that shows on this sheet that you have as a handout. But for purposes of what I'm about to do, it does not have any other bearing on this slide at all. So this is the periodic maintenance, and the word backlog is in here. There's the 734 miles of backlog that we talked about. If you were to say, hey, we're going to take that down and hope that it doesn't get any more expensive, in other words, we can take it down before it moves into reconstruction, and do it over a 15-year period of time. Those two, by the way, those ideas don't really work together, but for purposes of just discussion, That's what we assumed. It was a 15-year takedown on the 734. That's a little over $13 million a year. That shows up right there. And this other area also has a backlog, and that's represented here. And that's about $1.8 million a year. So you add the two together, and you get $14.93 million per year that is unfunded. Got to emphasize backlog, unfunded backlog maintenance. So all right, so what does that mean? And there we go. So unfunded needs sort of summarized down in this corner. There's the 4.3, which came from the sort of ongoing shortfall. The 14.3 for the backlog shows up there, but it's for 15 years. That one would be a permanent revenue stream if we were to get it funded or need. And then, so you add the two together. So for the first 15 years, we're needing a little over $19 million. And after the 15 years, it would drop down. So that's sort of I'm not sure that's good news, but a couple of things to remember. Again, no inflation, no change in how the reconstruction is accounted for in there. Going back to the capacity improvements, the only source of revenue that is currently dedicated to capacity improvements right now, as far as future revenue, is impact fees. And that's in the fifth note that's down there. But impact fees are unpredictable, they're not recurring, and you can't leverage anything with them, at least not that I know of anyway. And so we haven't addressed capacity in any substantive way. It is important that we have the impact fees, let me assure you, because right now, if somebody wants a new intersection or a new intersection improvement project need is identified, we're probably going to be looking at impact fees to take care of it. And right now, we just don't have much of that because we aren't actually collecting very much in the way of impact fees just yet. It's a little early in the re-implementation phase of the impact fees. That concludes my remarks, so I'm ready for questions.
Mr. Chairman, and before you get there, and so John is giving you a lot of information and giving you the big black binder, which really tells you how we got to sort of assessing the condition of each road that we have in the inventory. And I think it's a great document because, again, you have all of the roads that we have in their condition, and then the listing of unfunded projects. What you've not talked about as this board are the how you're going to prioritize those unfunded needs there, because John is again just giving it to you by district and simply advise you that you have the need and what the pavement condition index is for those. So at some point you're going to need to talk about how you prioritize those one-time dollars that you have during a mid-year and that you may have from time to time. So again, the suggestion being that this begins the conversation about direction for the 17-18 budget. Obviously, you need to talk about things that either you as a body have mentioned or various individual commissioners have mentioned. CBO funding, pay raises, health insurance are all issues that that's direction that Frank will need from the board with regards to building the 17-18 budget. And so, again, my suggestion to you all would be that you give some direction to him. And the only way that you can drill down, I believe, into the details of the $220 million, because that's where you're going to be trying to squeeze something from. The 220, and if you believe our accounting of it, you're really squeezing it from primarily the 43 million. So that's very difficult. So I think that you need to begin to schedule as soon as possible at least those generally funded departments to come before you so that you can have a discussion and an education about what's in their budget in particular. And that includes, again, some direction to the Citizens Budget Review Committee, because they need to be in step with the direction of the board and not running, in my mind, individually. And so, we've turned the corner on health insurance. Our reserves are as healthy as they've been for a while, and so, whereas you thought we wouldn't take some criticism for that, I think we are now. But you can never have enough in insurance reserves, and so feel pretty good about that. The reserves are stabilized. We're getting closer to that 10% projection, and as you know from last year, this county has an implied credit rating of AA+. And you can only get to a AAA. And so good news and bad news on roads. The good news is, as John outlined to you, that we literally go from 8 miles per year to we're at 20 to 34 next year, and then eventually 61, and you still can't catch up. And as he showed you, the way cities and counties catch up is that they have big funding chunks, and it's not unusual to address the backlog through the referendums and some sort of additional big increase in revenues there. And so, again, at the end of your discussion and the public comments, I'm going to ask that you begin to schedule those departments coming before you, including the charter offices, and so that again, you all can be educated together as a board on exactly where all of the dollars are.
Mr. Whitten, first of all, I would encourage you to start that process for us, schedule the different departments and the people, the directors that we're going to have to speak to, so we can get a feeling from them where they need to be and where they want to be. At the same time, I would charge the rest of us, the commissioners, to start thinking about where we can cut, how much we want to cut, and what cutting is possible. I will remind the three that are new that last year I came up with, I don't remember what it was, $2.3 million worth of cuts, but I didn't get any agreement. I didn't get one vote in favor of those cuts, because just like when I was campaigning, everybody was in favor of no more taxes. In fact, most people said, I want my taxes to go down. But then when you start questioning them, it was always, except for what I like. So you can talk to people that are in love with libraries, and you can cut everybody else's taxes, but boy, don't touch my libraries. And people that are in love with parks and recreation, same thing. You can cut libraries, but don't cut my parks and recreation. So that's the dilemma we face. And as you've seen, we have a very, and I know I've gotten some pushback, but we have a very tight budget. We don't have a lot of money to be chopping. So if you're going to chop, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt a lot of people. So, but that's the challenge we face, because there's no getting around the fact that we can kick the can down the road, and I hate using proverbial slang, but that's really the word. We can kick the can down the road to the next commission and to the next commission, but boy, about then, the crap's going to really hit the fan, and then where is the county going to be? Where's the county commission that's sitting at that time going to be? So I would suggest we not go that way. I would suggest that we suck it up and make the tough decisions and come up with some plan that we can agree on. Now, having said that, I would also encourage each one of you to consider the fact that you can lay out your...
Did you give him a time limit?
I'm done, I'm sorry.
3 minutes to do
That was my alarm to
That was
wake up.
perfect timing, I'm done.
That was for me to wake up.
Did it work?
No.
You can set aside the area that you just absolutely put off limits, like it could be animal services, and you could say, my safe zone is going to be parks and recreation, but we're going to have to compromise. We're going to have to say, okay, well, I understand your little fiefdom here you don't want to touch, but at the same time, I've got some areas I don't want to touch. So we're going to have to do you 20%, we're going to have to do me 20%, or whatever numbers we come up with, because if we keep pushing this down the road. I don't want to be on this board when the feedback and the pushback comes from the people out here. So, anyone else have anything to say?
Can I? Those were general comments. Do you mind if I ask?
No, absolutely.
Denny Hoff a question?
Absolutely.
Can you give us a little bit of a history with the debt service on the constitutional gas tax? You said it ends August 2020. How long was that? And I don't, debt's always a bad thing, but can you explain, is there a possibility to, refinance that? And the question being, what's the interest rate paid on it versus the amount of roads that are going from the resurface to reconstruction?
I can answer some of those questions. I don't think I can answer some of the others, but we issued a bond series in 2000 to generate bond proceeds to fund a number of projects which the board wanted to fund. Some of them were funding for a particular phase of a project, for example, just the design, I think in the 2000 when we did the PD&E for the Maxborough Bridge replacement, and we couldn't get the state to help us with that, so we just did it ourselves. And then because of that, we eventually got the state to pay for the design and the construction of the bridge. So that was one of those cases where we probably got a return on our investment there at about 80 to 1 or something like that. But but there was a number of projects that were like that. I don't recall what the interest was on it, and I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I'm sure we could find out how much interest was paid.
4%.
Was it 4%?
For the remaining, I don't know how many times we've refinanced it. Actually, this is a refinance here, the 2005 refinancing.
Yeah, I think we refinanced it. I know we refinanced it at least once, but and the refinancing, I've heard all kinds of things about what we were doing when we were refinancing it, and it's been in a way kind of humorous to hear what people thought we were doing when we were refinancing. But what we were doing was we were not incurring any further debt. We were not generating any additional bond proceeds. We did not change the payment date or the retirement date of the bonds. So the only thing that we were doing was changing the payments that we were having to pay in a downward direction. Otherwise, we wouldn't have done it. So we were actually saving the taxpayers' money on a year-over-year basis, and ultimately for the entire life of the bonds, we were reducing the cost of those bonds. And so that's, those were very good things that we did. Once you have the debt, if you can refinance it and reduce the cost of that debt, you've done a pretty good thing. And just by way of reference, so that somebody might ask this question: what about the local option gas tax bonds? There was two different bonds that were issued. One, the first series was issued in 2005. The second series was issued in 2007, and the 2005 debt is retired in 2026, I believe it is. And but before you get excited about that's only another 6 years after we take care of the constitutional gas tax. It's not quite don't jump on board that train yet, because what we did with the 2007 was we incurred a 30-year bond, which then is a structured payment, and we roll the 2005 debt service into the payments on the 2007 bonds, and so they continue. So that debt service will continue. Now we've refinanced both of those bonds, again reducing the debt service payment, not changing the amount of bond proceeds, not changing the debt payment date, retirement date, and just reducing the amount we pay on an annual basis. Again, converting debt service to a recurring revenue stream that we can use today in each of those cases.
And so for the constitutional, with 4 payments left, it probably is beyond an opportunity to refinance. Probably wouldn't it makes sense to refinance because of issuance costs and things like that.
Or, and extending the terms, you said that had not been done from the initial.
Board policy is that we simply take advantage of a lower interest rate environment, but don't extend the terms.
Mr. Denninghoff, I got a question and comment about the local option gas tax. Currently, the county gets 47% of the local option gas tax, and cities get 53%. We also have MSTUs for unincorporated areas. Just a point, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but cities do not put money to the roads that we have to maintain. If we have to maintain a county road or one of our roads, it goes through the city. Yeah, so we don't get any other money. We don't get MSTU money. We get only 47% the gas tax money, yet it's in the city limits. Is that correct?
Yes, I'll try to, there's a couple of interesting things about local option gas tax. For every dollar that we receive as a county, and I'll say the geographic area of Brevard County, I think it's 47.13% comes to the county and 42.77 or whatever it is, or 87% goes to the cities, gets divided amongst the cities, and the way I sort of talk about it is the cities spend 100% of their gas tax dollars inside their cities, and they often ask us to come spend a lot of ours inside their cities too. Now, I will say, there are roads inside their cities that are ours. And I'm not going to go into the explanation of why we have roads inside the cities. It's kind of a long story, and then I'll get a little bit too passionate, and that wouldn't be a good thing. They don't want to, understandably, they don't want to spend money on maintaining a county road. And generally speaking, we've not received contributions from cities towards maintenance efforts associated with a county road. We have received, we do have situations where the cities want to do landscaping on a county road, and so we'll enter into an agreement that allows them to do that. We're currently trying to put one together like that for West Melbourne on Minton Road. And we have one on parts of Minton Road and on Palm Bay Road with the city of Palm Bay. And there's a couple of other examples as well. But other than that, pretty much we have to take care of those roads, and they look at us to fix them. I will say that in the cities of Cape Canaveral and Cocoa Beach, when we fixed up roads, they took them over. And they kind of did that as a means of sort of attracting our interest in going ahead and fixing up that road, and then they would take care of things from that point on. But even with that, if you look at our numbers here, you can kind of see why it's still not entirely it's not an irresistible offer if that happens, but it is certainly one that if I get an offer from a city to do something like that, I will bring it to the board.
Generally, what do the cities use their percentage of local option gas tax for?
Well, I would just tell you, I don't really know, but I can tell you, because I don't stick my nose into their budgets, but I will say that they've got to maintain their roads just like we do, and they've got to maintain ditches just like we do. They've got striping to take care of, signage to take care of. They've got, the bigger cities have signals that they have to take care of. And so I expect that's what they're doing. They have to resurface. And I'll tell you that most of the cities, at least on the mainland side, most of the cities on the mainland are I don't know if they're in as bad a shape as we are typically. The city of Palm Bay may be in worse. I would say the others are in better shape than we are, but some of them are in pretty tough shape. Some of them are having serious issues, and I don't think they're in quite as bad a shape as we are, just because they don't have as big an inventory as we do. Palm Bay does, but we do not. The rest of the cities do not.
Okay.
Anyone else?
I was just going to say that, I think Commissioner Pritchett and myself have been through this budget process several times, and I don't know I'm sure you had the same issues with serving during a very difficult economic downturn. So, we're all about priorities, and you probably share in some of the same priorities given what you've said publicly about infrastructure and public safety. So I'm looking forward to it, and I appreciate this. And Mr. Denninghoff, you and I already talked already. I want to get with you to, because I just, as a general statement, I know that many of the other needs in the county are there, and I think that we can definitely shift some monies around to make sure, number one, that we are taking care of our employees, and number two, that we're doing the right things by prioritizing the budget properly. But, if we are such a backlog, I think that, at the very least, my general opinion is that for this overage, definitely commit toward roads, towards the maintenance, and then we can talk about those things that you brought up some time ago about and you didn't have any support, which just completely blew my mind. I remember those items you brought to the board, and I'm not saying I necessarily agree with all of them, but you were pretty on point. So I look forward to you bringing some of those things back, and as I will myself. And I'm all about compromise as long as I'm not compromising my principles. So, and it's not an ideological stand, it's a reality, because I have served before, and I do understand how government works. I just think that we need to be responsible, because that's why we were chosen, and all of us pretty handedly. So I think people like the message, and I think that they expect what we promised to deliver. So,
Yeah, and with regard to the numbers the cuts that I had come up with, you still have to remember, we didn't get any support for however much money it was. But the other thing to consider is that it's a pretty paltry sum, $1 million, $2 million, whatever it was. That's not going to fix $10 million worth of roads, or $20 million for that matter. So, we have a steep hill to climb. So,
but it may help as far as, at least it's something. You don't say no because you can't tackle the entire.
yeah, like the Chinese say, every great journey begins with the first step.
Right.
Okay. Sure.
Are you going to try to budget some type of pay increase into the employees? And what have we done in the past? We've just been doing cost of living, correct? We haven't really done any increases?
Yeah, I know she's yeah, obviously, we're going to follow the board's, direction, and we'll be bringing, information to the board. We are in the middle of, negotiations, so we'll be coming to the board, within the near distant future, just to bring information to the board about where we are with our we have 3 bargaining units, but we're in negotiations with some of them, and we'll be bringing comparables to the board. We'll be getting direction from you upcoming shortly, I would say within the next 60 days, and we'll be using that information to move forward. Excuse me? What we did this year was a 1.5, right?
Cost of living.
It was a cost of living adjustment this year of 1.5.
Because with the government, I know we're going to have infrastructure, but it's also a service entity. So I know we're going to have to look at those costs. Have we done any type of pay study or anything?
The last pay study we did was probably 10-plus years ago.
Okay, so I'm kind of waiting for you to come back with some of that so we can see what kind of budget we're looking at.
And one of the challenges, of course, is we didn't expend funds on a pay study when we realized that whatever the pay study results were, there weren't going to be funds available. There wasn't any, potential will to do that, so we didn't spend that extra money, to be quite honest with you. And that was a big reason why we haven't done it, unless the board is thinking differently. Then, we know that we're behind. Our employees know that they're behind in a variety of areas, but you've got to look at what the, funding opportunities are and the priorities that are going to be established. And, we've had some, you saw that in the presentation today, some significant needs that still remain unaddressed. So we're looking for the board in terms of, how you want us to try to structure things. And I think you've talked about it today in terms of some of the things that you think you'd like to see priorities in the future, which we look forward to hearing what you have to say and making sure we can try to put that together as best we can. So we'll have the departments start coming up here rather quickly, because there's a lot of information that, I'm sure that you all haven't had the opportunity here to hear where they are yet. So we've done it in the past over the last several years, so I don't think it'll be too hard. The directors are pretty, they've done it before, and so they'll be ready in short order. been anticipating that this might be coming up, that we would have that need to do that. And so, Stockton's let them know. We've all been aware of it for, the last 60 to 90 days about make sure you're ready and be ready to present the information to the board and explain things to them, where you are, why, what your programs are, what services you're providing, what those costs are, and then the board can, prioritize for us where you want us to go.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to hearing what we think the revenue estimations are going to be moving forward. And you guys, great presentation. Really, really, really informative. Thank you, John. Really, really good. And good job, Jill. Thanks.
Mr. DeBaya.
As a teacher, I'm asking for the homework assignment. It sounds as though you went through the budget line by line, and when you made the recommendations, and I'm sorry I wasn't part of the board, you found individual lines with a dollar figure attached and brought them up to the board as a potential savings, and you laid the groundwork that transportation was the priority. So you prioritized, I guess, the million or the 1.3 as less important than
Right.
what roads were.
Right.
Is that the direction you would like us to take as individuals as we go through these budgets to?
I think that would be the prudent thing to do. Absolutely.
And then we discuss each one of those specific line items as a group as to whether or not priority A is more important than, the infrastructure of the roads.
I think that would be a good place to
Okay.
start, because there's no doubt that it's going to be painful. If you've got to tell somebody, you know what, we can't do this year. But the greater priority is a road. Is this service more important than going in debt, further in debt, and in disastrous debt to fix roads in the future? That's the question. That's the tough question. That's the tough answers we're going to have to come up with.
I just think it's very important that we all are working on the same line item. And I don't know what your proposals were, I apologize, but I look forward to hearing them again so we can decide, because
I don't remember yesterday, so I can tell you I don't either.
because the roads
do.
are getting worse and worse, so the priority is obviously getting that much more important. So your ideas, while other folks may have decided that they weren't as important, times have changed from last year, and I fully hope that, I look forward to hearing those as well as other ones, because that's the way I certainly will be going through the budget.
Yeah, one of the things I think that really, for when Kurt and I came on, was we did go through all these departments. They gave briefings, and they went through exactly what they do, what their mandates are, what their funding sources are, and it really helped go through the whole process of the whole organization, what they do. It gives us all a good understanding of what, because some things you may be able to cut, but the fact is you can't spend that money anyway because of the color of money. So it really, all of this, as we go through, it's going to be, I think we'll see a lot more about how we can, what we can do.
And that's an extremely good point, because, when you're out in the public and people say, well, you could have, instead of spending $6,000 on a palm tree, you could have put that toward roads. Well, in fact, you couldn't, because the $6,000 was spent by one of our favorite subjects, CRA. So the fact is, the color of money that prevents us from taking that 20 trees that were $6,000 a piece and putting it toward roads. So there are a lot of things that you could say, well, we should have used it toward roads. Well, the bottom line is you can't. So it'll be a good exercise.
Help me, Mr. Chair, wasn't the CRA, isn't that something, won't that, if we start to work back on that, isn't that money that eventually can go into the green? I understand that there's debt obligations out there, but,
Right.
As we move forward, that is money that we can make sure is in the green and maybe allocate towards roads.
Right. And I think it's important for everybody to understand that we do have contractual obligations with the CRA, so we just can't shut them down and beat them up and say, go away. But what we can do, and hopefully we will accomplish when we do our workshop and we do our interlocal agreements, we can get a handle on and get an idea when there's going to be a finite end to a CRA and when we can count on those funds coming back. And, I keep using the term, but we are the bank. and it's our tax money, your tax money, that keeps funding the CRA. So when the CRA has completed its work, those funds, instead of continuing to be funneled into the CRA, they come back and they can go into the general fund, correct?
Yeah, I mean, they're, you know, the CRA, in thinking about the work, and thinking about the workshop, you know, you guys almost have to address each individual CRA and know where you are legally on that. You know, obviously, they're going to want to tell you about how they're value added, but I don't think that you all have a good handle on where you are in terms of this CRA either has an interlocal or it doesn't. Even the percentages, some of them have different percentages, and so we'll try to set that up to where it's going to be, you know, that's going to be a long workshop because, again, I'm not going to pick on anyone, but we'll try to set that up to where you know legally and with the force of the ordinance and the interlocals where you are. But that's you got to look at each one individually, and there's a lot of confusion out there between city and county and their legal opinions there. But I think that's going to be the only way you can get there is let's talk about CRA A through Z and exactly the circumstances with regards to when they in, how much revenue they're taking from the county, et cetera.
And that's absolutely the hope. That we need to all be on the same page so that when we walk away from the workshop, whenever that is, that they understand where we're coming from, we understand where they're coming from, and then they can just go forward and complete whatever they're doing, and we can count on where they're going to be and what we're going to get out of them when.
And if it does go long, I mean, we can always, you know, do a follow-up. I'm sure we can all look at our calendar simultaneously and decide within a week or two that, so people aren't sitting here for 8 hours, because although it's long and I know it's cumbersome, and I know staff has been complaining that their CRA stuff keeps coming up, and cities are complaining, everyone else is complaining that we're shifting money there. So I think, at the very least, we at least need to go through this process to see what we can do about the ones we can make changes in. So we do have an answer when someone asks, well, why did my tax dollars go to pay for that $10,000 sign? Because I want to have an answer to say, you know what, these are decisions that were made beforehand. We can't do anything for the next 11 years. We are stuck. I apologize to you as your representative, but this is where we're moving forward. And oh, by the way, this board has made the consensus now to stop it, let this CRA sunset. So at least maybe that's the compromise that we are able to come up with this board. But I think it is constructive, and again, I apologize that these cities have had to come out here before and staff has had to deal with this stuff. But this stuff we are new. This is important to me. It was important to me when I was in the city of Palm Bay, and I want to be able to have answers for people. So.
But and now we have more perspective.
Right.
It's $4.6 million. Some of these are prior to the charter, so there's not a darn thing we can do. Some of the ones that are post-charter are in debt obligation. So this $4.6 million is not, immediately grab, but I mean, when we look at that, at the unfunded needs for roads, assuming we could, and we cannot, but assuming we could, that is a quarter of the road needs in just one section of the budget. Now, we have to make projections. If we were to how many resources would we get year 1, year 2, year 3, or year 4? But it's a decent portion of just the unfunded infrastructure needs that we currently have. So as we approach this, I hope we look at this as CRA need A, is it more important than county road need B? And certainly that's the approach, that I will take. And I ask all, CRAs as they come up, please justify that paying for a road sign for a business, even if the business pays half of it, is more important than a deteriorating road that we can fix for a fraction of what we can this year versus next. And if they can make that argument, I look forward to that justification.
I think we'll find out a lot about CRAs when they come, and each one I think we're going to have to look at individually. A lot of times there's return on investments in these, and of that money that we're spending out to them, it might be even zero of what it was if we hadn't created the CRAs, because they're starting to make revenues that pay into the county funds, whereas there wouldn't be any, like the one in Melbourne that just got implemented. They're looking at a $28 million project, which is going to create enough revenues to pay for the whole bond. So it's really zero impact on the county by the time it's done in their city because it's paying for its own project. So that's why I'm looking forward for return on investments when these entities come. And we can determine that if we have one that's losing, we need to help encourage them to do something different. Or one that's not creating revenues, we need to encourage them to do something different. The thing of the CRA is it's supposed to create some revenues to pay for itself and then to benefit the county down the road with increased revenues by people moving in with housing and paying these. What I'm looking forward to, Mr. Whitten, is what we're going to end up looking at for revenues. I know this cap charter kind of puts a lot of damper on the fun we could be having with the millage not even hitting rollbacks. I'm curious to see where that is. I'm sure the property values are going up again, which is a good sign, but I'm interested in seeing how the index works out and what you're going to be able to come up to work with this. Maybe we won't have to do any cuts. Wouldn't that be nice? I don't think that's going to happen. But I know to get that bottom line, we've got two choices, increase revenues or decrease costs. So hopefully we're going to get to be looking at revenue increase also as we're moving forward with the budget.
One of the things, we have to be cognizant of is, as we go along, it's not just CRAs, it's anything else. If we find something we can have a savings or a cut, we have to look at it, make sure it's sustainable over a long period of time, so he can be planning for roads down the road. Roads, okay, got it.
No pun intended.
Anyway, so what that means is somehow we're going to have to make sure there's a funding source that's automatically allocated to that it doesn't fluctuate, and that we keep saving that savings. Otherwise, down the road, other county commissions, whatever, it's going to get lost in the noise. And we have to make absolutely sure that gets there. So, and it has to be sustainable over and over. So, that's my comment.
And we'll try to do, the CPI right now they're looking at is the 1.26.
Wow, that's big.
Yeah, I know. Again, and I think I know how to set up the CRA workshop, but, think about tax increments. And there's a base year, and there's the current year. And so the difference, the pay is the difference between the base year and the current year. So most of the 4.2 or whatever it is, 4.6 is going to be coming from the CRAs, which you can't affect because they were created prior to 1994. So, but we'll try to set that up to where we're talking about that because, again, I just think individually you need to know where you are on each CRA, and so, but we'll do try to set that up appropriately.
Anyone else have a comment regarding the budget?
When would you like to when would you like to call the next workshop as to, dealing, and is there any directions as to which departments that, you'd like to start with, or do you want to leave that to
As far
staff?
as I would, Mr. Whitten, you can handle the scheduling.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, obviously the bigger the general fund, the more you want to talk about it. I know what the issues you've talked about over time. Again, I think you need to hear from the charter officers. I will tell you that some of your workshops are going to happen after your regular board meeting. So you'll have, and we'll try to control the agenda, you'll have a board meeting and then you'll come up here for a workshop. That's the only way to get to it. Prior to, in time for Frank to put together a good budget proposal.
And as far as where, I don't think anything can be off limits.
Yeah, I agree, and I would just like, as soon as we start scheduling these, I fully don't expect any of us will walk in there blind. I think we need as much heads up, so if we decide to start with, I'm just transit services, I'm just throwing that one out first. Yeah. We need plenty of time individually to look over it so we can find, good questions to ask and then come up with suggestions as to, where cuts could be made or where they potentially need more money. But we need time individually prior to whatever that meeting is. So the sooner we can get, the meeting schedules with the actual departments, I think that's going to behoove us to have discussions that lead to positive change.
And it certainly won't be, the enterprise agencies, obviously, you can put at the back of the schedule, so hopefully we'll have some rhyme and reason to the schedule.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you to the board for your good questions and input. Thank you for, excuse me?
Public comment.
We haven't gotten there yet.
Okay.
I want to thank our staff for their heads up and their diligence, and boy, I'm glad you guys do what you do, because I wouldn't be able to do what you do. So thank you very much. Do we have any public comments? Hearing none, we'll go into board reports. Mr. Whitten?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, you all got today the first, hot off the presses, the first copy of Brevard Delivers. It is going to be produced quarterly. It is, I think, either ordinance, I think the ordinance requires an annual report by the county manager, and so this is put out to you not only as the annual report, but a quarterly what's happening in Brevard County government to the public. So you have the first copy.
And I looked through it, and it's very impressive. Thank you, Mr. Whitten. Shannon?
No report from the county attorney's office.
Ms. Pritchett?
No report?
Mr. Barfield?
No report.
Mr. Tobias?
No report.
Mrs. Nardi?
No report.
I have a couple of things. I want to remind everybody that yours truly has volunteered to get his head shaved. That's for the St. Baldrick's Day ceremony, I guess, what they call it. Kids that undergo chemotherapy often lose their hair, so we the people that have volunteered are going to voluntarily shave our heads in support of these kids, and so we're asking the public to help fund the project of defeating childhood cancer. So if you have an interest in doing that, you can go to stbaldricks.com. You can find my name on there, and you can click on it, and we can raise lots of money. I went from $230 yesterday to $750 in one day, so keep it coming. And the other thing I wanted to mention was that we, Brevard County, took another step forward toward Brevard being a member of the Central Florida Expressway Authority. This board voted 5-0 a while back for us to pursue that. And I attended the CFX board meeting today in Orlando, and I made our presentation as to why I believe we should be accepted as a board member. After my presentation and discussion by the CFX board, they voted 8-0 to accept us as a board member. So now it's only up to the state, Tallahassee. The House of Representatives have a bill sponsored by Mr. Goodson, and the Senate has a bill, similar bill, same bill, sponsored by Senator Mayfield. And if it passes there, then Brevard County will be an official member of the Central Florida Expressway Authority. Now, what does that mean? That means that we'll be at the table when decisions are made regarding roads. It also means that now their border won't stop at the Brevard County line. So they and we will have input as to where we go on 528, for example. But more importantly, the corridor between Pineda Causeway and Orlando International Airport. That is the next road planned. And without us being part of the board, it would never happen. So we laid the first step here to get that done. So just think of that. It would create another east-west corridor to Orlando. It would go basically out Pineda all the way to Orlando International Airport. And it would provide for more growth, but the main thing is it would take an awful lot of traffic off of 520, 50, 528, and diversify the traffic going east and west and transfer some of it south, because right now anybody that's in the south that wants to go west, they either have to go 192, which doesn't get them to Orlando, or they have to go north to 520 or 528. So that's kind of a milestone. So I wanted to make everybody aware that that occurred also. So with that, this meeting is adjourned.
Okay.
The opinions expressed by any member of the public during any period of public comment do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, or the program sponsor, and are solely those of the presenter. The Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, and the program sponsor hereby expressly disclaim any and all responsibility or liability for any defamatory or slanderous statements expressed by any member of the public during any such period.